Hey, if you're a Kiss fan, I think you're really going to enjoy the video that I have for you here today. And even if you're not a Kiss fan, I think you'll have some fun with what we're doing with this video. I'm going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to introduce what is actually going to become a series for a little while. And let me tell you what it is that we're going to be doing here. So a few weeks ago, Gary and I were having one of our discussions. We do probably too many Kiss videos because both of us we're just Kiss fans and we like talking about it. And so he mentioned that there was a biography that was on Hulu about, the Kiss's story. And I thought, oh man, I need to go watch that. So I got on Hulu the next day and watched it. And it turns out what it is it's the A&E biography called Kisstory that they put out back in 2021. It was a 2-part series. Anyway, so I'd already seen it. But of course, it's Kiss and I'm just watching. And so I get sucked into it and I start watching the whole thing again. And as I'm watching it, I notice something that all of us have seen 1,000 times. When you watch these biographies that tell these little historical stories that go back into rock bands or famous actors or whatever, one of the things that they do frequently in these shows is they go into these montages. And you know what I'm talking about. They'll show pictures of them doing this and then the snapshot of this. And inevitably, they always show newspaper headlines in these montages, kind of giving you snapshots of what's going on at any given time. So then I thought, what would be really fun to do was to go through that Kisstory biography, and every time that they show a headline, go find that article and then find what newspaper it was in, when it was released, and actually read it and see what was said. Not just the headline, but actually go find it. So right now on the screen, I am going to show you a snapshot of the first article that popped up in this Kisstory biography that was put on A&E that's currently on Hulu. And here you can see the headline there. It says, "Is the world ready for Kiss?" And so what I did is I actually went in to one of our accounts where we have these online newspaper accounts that we go into to do some of these searches, and I found it. I found the article, and I'm gonna read this article to you because it's not very long. It's just a couple of cool little things in it, but maybe even more interesting than that, I want to show you just a couple of other things, because part of what makes these little historical dives interesting is not just the artist or the story, but it's the context of the world around them at the time. And so when you go dig into some of these old newspapers, what is fascinating to me, the article, of course, I love reading the stuff, but then you notice, and I know some of you do too, because whenever we do these articles, inevitably somebody makes a comment about some of the other little things they see around the sides of the articles. And I thought that'd be kind of interesting to do, is to go look up these articles, find the date, the location, wherever it was that it was printed, and then take a quick look at the front page. What was going on at that time? And take a quick look at some of the things around the article. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a series of these. I'm actually going to go through that video. I don't know how often we'll put them out, and every time they have a headline, we're going to track down the article and then show it to you and see what it said and the context, when it was released, where it was printed. And anyway, I hope you'll find these things interesting. I've just gone through this first one, and I'm actually just like getting engrossed in it. I'm fascinated by the kind of recent pop culture history, and not just pop culture, but just things happening on a national scale. And anyway, it's really fascinating. So this first one, the headline is "The World Ready for Kiss?" And this was printed August 19th, 1977. And it was in the News-Star in Monroe, Louisiana. So any of you in Louisiana, I'm actually now curious if that newspaper's still around and do you know anything about that? But this is why I got the album Love Gun out, as part of this video, because of course Love Gun was released on that year, 1977, June 30th of 1977. And so when this newspaper article was printed, July, so it was less than 2 months after this album had come out. And this article was actually just before Alive 2 was going to come out. Alive 2 was not much after this because, of course, Love Gun came out. They recorded some concerts. They put Alive 2. I mean, they were doing so many different things were happening at the time. But so now on your screen, I just want to show you a couple other things. So here's the article, and we'll get to the article in a second. But look alongside this article. Look at what was in the theaters at the time when Love Gun had just come out. They're talking about Kiss. Kiss is like big news in the world at this moment. And look what came out at the same time. For the Love of Benji. Do you remember this? I was a little kid into Kiss at that time. And matter of fact, in 1977, I was probably just barely learning about Kiss at that point. Would have been, when this came out, I was 8 years old. So I was barely kind of learning about them and getting excited about them. And so you know what else I would have loved at the time? Benji. And so For the Love of Benji was in theaters at the time. And then look at these other things that were in theaters. The People That Time Forgot, which was, I think, came after The Land. Was it The Land That Time Forgot? MacArthur was in theaters. Smokey and the Bandit was in theaters at the time. The Spy Who Loved Me was in theaters. One on One, which I kind of remember something about that. And then I'm going to go to the previous page because there's a couple of interesting things on here too. So check this out. So August 19th, again, in the same newspaper where I'm taking that headline that came out of Kisstory, Empire of the Ants. Okay, now I'm dying to know if any of you remember this, because I saw this in this newspaper and I thought, what? It's got to be some campy, silly. So just for fun, I looked up what it's about, and this kind of cracked me up. Here is what the story's about. Empire of the Ants. Real estate scammers try to sell land near a Florida swamp only to discover it is overrun by giant, radioactive, mind-controlling ants that have taken over a nearby town. Okay. Anyway, in case you're wondering, now I've got to go find that movie, Empire of the Ants. But now think about 1977 again. What other massive things happened that year that would be happening right now at this moment? Well, as a kid, you remember Bad News Bears, of course. That was another one at the time that I just loved those. It was so silly, and of course, I was a little kid at the time. But check this out down at the bottom. Star Wars. Star Wars, 9th week of Star Wars. I saw Star Wars when I saw it when it was in the theaters. I'm old enough to have been through that experience. And I remember, I think my dad took me to see it, I think 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. And I was one of those people that stood in those lines that would just wrap around the buildings. How many of you went through that? And it's so fascinating to put all this stuff in context, because this album was coming out when Star Wars was being released. So fascinating thinking about this. And then this movie called the Bootleggers Angel, I had to look this up. Apparently this had come out a couple of years earlier, but because Jaclyn Smith, Charlie's Angels had come out in 76, and because she was now this superstar or this famous actress, this movie she'd been in a couple years earlier, I guess, got re-released under this. It was called the Bootleggers or something, and then they call it the Bootleggers Angel because now she's so big. Anyway, that was kind of interesting. And then I saw this here. This I thought was kind of funny. Friday and Saturday special 10-ounce ribeye steak dinner at Bonanza for $3.59. So those of you that live in Monroe, Louisiana, do you know anything about that? And isn't that funny, the picture of the guy that they picked to put in this article? Okay, so I have one more thing to show you in this newspaper that just I thought was so fascinating that came out at the same time. Okay, so now here's the front page of this newspaper. Monroe News-Star, August 19th, 1977, right there. West Monroe, Louisiana, Friday afternoon. Now, check this out. You know what else happened that week? August 16th, Elvis Presley died. A couple of days before this article. And then check this out. Elvis's girlfriend. There's a picture of his girlfriend with a picture of sitting next to a picture of Elvis. Ginger Alden, Elvis Presley's girlfriend, said in a copyrighted interview with the Commercial Appeal, she found the singer's body. Earlier reports said Presley was found by his road manager, Joe Esposito. And so anyway, there's this article at the same time talking about how his girlfriend's claiming, no, I'm the one who found Elvis. And then on page 2, there's a picture on the same newspaper of, I mean, check. We forget just how big a deal Elvis was. Look at that motorcade of Elvis's. I mean, that's just crazy. All the cars lined up. So this is 3 days after Elvis's death, and it goes Elvis laid to rest. And there's a whole article here. We should read that one at some time. I'm fascinated by Elvis, not just because I live near Las Vegas. Elvis is just a fascinating character. So anyway, let's jump back to let's go back to this, to the article that we were looking at a minute ago and read this thing about Kiss. So now, again, this is an article. This was in Kisstory on Hulu. That's where it is right now if you want to go watch it. And it is pretty interesting if you've never watched it before. They flash this headline across the screen, "Is the world ready for Kiss?" And here is the article. And you'll recognize that picture because these pictures, as I recall, these were the shots that were taken. They were taken around the Love Gun era, but you'd see some of these pictures on the Kiss trading cards. You'd see them in that the little booklet that came inside of Live 2, that there was a certain photo session that happened where you'd get these, and this was clearly taken out of that session. So here we go. Far Out Foursome. Kiss may not be your idea of an appealing group, but you can't not knock success. The rock group has already made $30 million from album sales. The Vampire, Gene Simmons, plays bass. Star-Eyed Paul Stanley and Spaceman Ace Frehley play guitars. And the drummer is Peter Criss, Pussycat. Okay, now let's go. And that was the picture next to the article. And so now let's take a look at this article. And it's not very long, but it's kind of cool. Is the world ready for Kiss? Hollywood. Is the world ready for a $30 million Kiss? That's how much money has rolled in for record albums alone from rock's outrageous foursome. And there are additional millions cresting for Kiss t-shirts, posters, belt buckles, photographs, and endless list of other promotion possibilities. Now, $30 million in record sales alone, it says. Now, think also at the time. Now, we talked about, Elvis and movies, the successful things were happening there, but think about the music also that was happening around this time. Again, this is 1977. And the article that we're reading comes out on August 19th of 1977, but you're talking about everything that was going on during that year leading up to this, when they're talking about this massive success that Kiss has had. Think of the other things that are going on at that time. So in 1976, Hotel California came out, Eagles. And in 1977, that's when, because it came out at the end of 76, it hit number one, Hotel California, in 1977. So again, contextually, think about what was happening when Kiss was reaching its prime and hitting these numbers that we're talking about, these $30 million. So again, Eagles' Hotel California has come out. The previous year, also in 76, Boston's debut album comes out. I mean, think of those two albums, the impact both those things had. And so Boston, even though that came out in 76, it bled over into 1977. And I think a lot of people see that album and Hotel California, even though they were put out in 76, they really in some ways owned large portions of 1977 because they had such a massive impact, especially that Boston's debut album. I mean, that just like almost invented arena rock and just owned 1977, of course. Then also in 1977, earlier in the year, Pink Floyd's Animals came out, which was a big deal. I mean, that thing had such an impact. Also in 1977, Foreigner, and this is all the stuff leading up to August. There's a bunch of things that happened after the article, but I'm just talking about the ones that happened prior to this, when this was being written. Foreigner's debut album came out, and Fleetwood Mac Rumors, which to this day is still one of the biggest selling albums of all time, came out around this time, or a little bit before this article came out. And the other thing that you have to remember is that disco was huge at this time. As a matter of fact, one of the songs that came out in 1977 was that you would know was Casey and the Sunshine Band, and you know the song "Shake, Shake, 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 Shake Your Boot." That came out right around the same time that this article was published, and when Love Gun came out. And then the other thing, again, contextually, as Kiss is reaching its peak, Elvis dies, Kiss is being recognized. Look, hey, this is a big business here. The other thing that was happening that kind of had this, that kind of shook the world, and it still resonates today, was in May of that year, May of 1977, the Sex Pistols put out a single called God Save the Queen. And it shook the foundations in some ways of just the rock world. Now, although there had been, people credit, like the Dolls and others with coming up with punk rock before this, when you look at the impact that the Sex Pistols had, I mean, and they were they were in and out, they just kind of came in and went so fast. But again, it's the context of what's going on at this moment that is so fascinating. So just a month before Love Gun comes out, God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols comes out, and then they just like a bulldozer run into pop culture, and still to this day are just, I mean, I heard Steve Jones is and they're not doing it with Johnny Rotten, I don't think, but I mean they're still around. People still talk about them. They still have an impact. Anyway, I didn't mean to get so far off course there, but part of, to me, what makes these things so interesting is the big picture of what was going on as Kiss is reaching that peak. And then one other thing that was happening in the world that year, January of 1977, Apple computers began. So that's the time period that we're talking about here. Okay, so now, $30 million. That's how much money is rolled in for record albums alone from rock's outrageous foursome. And there are additional millions cresting for Kiss: t-shirts, posters, belt buckles, photographs, and endless list of other promotion possibilities. I know I had a belt buckle and I had several other things, but I'm curious how many of you had the stuff, because this was part of the brilliance, at least from a capitalist standpoint, of what of the impact that Bill Aucoin had when he came into the band, and they're going to talk about that here in just a second. But they just became this juggernaut of money-making capitalist ventures. It was amazing what they did, and it seems like everybody kind of picked up on it after that, but no one had done it like them. Okay, Kiss actually looks like did I miss something there? Yeah. Kiss actually looks like 4 clonings from Alice Cooper, who abdicated as high priest of the Weirdos when he skittered off to Hollywood to try to make it as an actor. And that's not, they're kind of blowing that out of proportion a little bit, because that year Alice Cooper was in a movie with Mae West called Sextet. I don't know anything about that movie. I just know that it happened. And he was also kind of in this period. Alice Cooper I think he was in Hollywood Squares. I mean, it was probably within a year or two of this that he was on the Muppet Show. So Alice Cooper just was kind of morphing a little bit, but he never really, when it says he abdicated, and maybe they're talking, because he didn't leave the music business, but maybe he kind of started seeming a little bit more mainstream, because he started branching off into these other things. Anyway, but it's just interesting how they put that there. But then here we go. So let's see here, to make it as an actor. Kiss members are bassist Gene Simmons, garbed as a long-tongued vampire, guitarist Paul Stanley, the star-eyed lover boy, guitarist Ace Frehley, a silver-eyed, spaced-out spaceman, and drummer Peter Criss, and you'll love this, drummer Peter Criss, a cowardly lion from Oz. I maybe I've missed something my whole life, but I've never heard Peter Criss referred to as the cowardly lion from Wizard of Oz. He was the cat man. I mean, you hear Peter Criss talk about it, and he's the cat man, but anyway, that's what they call him here, the cowardly lion from Oz. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but sometimes when you see how he acts, when you see him in person, there is a little bit of that vibe that comes through, just a touch. Okay. The whole Kiss phenomenon, the first act to genuinely electrify the pubescent set of the 1970s, is a shrewd work of promotion geniuses at Casablanca Records and the group's manager, Bill Aucoin, who visualized them as four Alice Coopers when he first caught them at the Diplomat Hotel in New York several years ago. So again, this is August of 1977. So it was almost exactly 4 years earlier in 1973 when Bill Aucoin, and that's what happened. He saw them at the Diplomat Hotel in New York I think it was called the Crystal Room or the Crystal Ballroom is where he went and saw them. Anyway, and it says that he saw them as four Alice Coopers, which is interesting because they were just talking about Alice Cooper. And that really was one of the things and again, the context of this is so important. Because in 1970, in February of 1973, Alice Cooper put out $1 Billion Babies, which became, I think it went to number one. And it kind of showed the world what this whole shock rock thing could do. And so Bill Aucoin sees these four guys. See, because when you understand a little bit about Alice Cooper, because of course that's not his name. Alice Cooper is a character. And so Bill Aucoin is sitting there watching these guys thinking, now this is actually taking that same idea, but we're creating these four distinct characters. And kind of what's funny about that is even though they didn't take, when Alice Cooper picked the name Alice Cooper, he was intentionally trying to think of what would be the most, grandma making cookies for you kind of name that he could possibly come up with, something like Betty Crocker, and it was Alice Cooper. That's what he came up with. So that, of course, wasn't his real name. But similarly with Kiss, none of them went by their actual names. Even Peter Criss, they shortened his last name. So even though they kind of were using part of their name, kind of similar to Alice Cooper, they really did create these alter egos, and they actually changed their names in the process. And so Bill Aucoin saw that. He looks at these guys and he even said that later. I don't have the quote, but he said something about, I saw what looked like four Alice Coopers. These people, these guys had created these alter egos. They'd created these characters now. And then these characters are what carries this show. And then they become, later on we start to see them. I mean, kids like me, you see them as these superheroes. Let me look at this picture right here. This is one of the greatest album covers ever created. And part of it is because you turn these four guys, this rock band, into these four like Greek gods. And it was just, so Bill Aucoin saw that. And so Bill visits with him and he says, look, if I can get you a record contract, I want to be your manager. And then he was kind of the genius. Of course, he did with, Neil Bogart had this brand new label called Casablanca, got him signed with him. And then the rest is Kisstory, if you will. But Bill Aucoin then is the guy that said, hey, we should do all these other things that can create this. Take advantage of the fact that you guys are these characters and go so far as to just start creating all these different things around, and we're going to hide your faces and all that stuff was Bill Aucoin's kind of genius coming in there. So anyway, let's see, Diplomat Hotel. Okay, since then the promotion has been relentless. Now there even is a Kiss comic book selling for, get this, $1.50. Musically, Kiss comes across with Hard Rock All the Way on their latest for Casablanca called Love Gun, which is the one we hear. It's high-quality rock, even without the flash and color. And then that's the end of that article. So to me, this is so fascinating. Partly why we looked this up, like I said, was because this was the one that the first article that flashed across the screen in that video. And it's pretty fascinating to go then and read what they had to say about this, because it gives you that little snippet, that little insight into what Bill Aucoin was thinking at the time. He sees these guys and he saw what could happen. He saw the potential. Back in 1973, when he sees him at the hotel, he goes, I get it. I see where this can go. And then part of the reason that we even know who Kiss is today is because of Bill Aucoin. And so, again, for me, fascinating going back and look at this. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through that show, and every time there's an article, we're going to find it and we're going to look it up, and we're going to kind of bring something similar, show you some of the other stuff in the newspaper. And so now, at this point, I would love to get your feedback on this video and what was or was not interesting about it, because we're going to do a series with these, and I'd like it to turn into something kind of interesting that you enjoy in the process, because I make these videos largely for me because I have a blast doing it. But obviously there's a lot of people out there also that are kind of like me that find these things interesting. And so I'd really love to get your feedback on this, what you find interesting, additional context that maybe you know that I didn't bring up that's worth bringing up in the notes. That would be really nice. And then anyway, that's what I'd really love to get from you right now. So also, if you're not following the channel already, please follow the channel. Please like the video. And also, if you're a Kiss fan, I've said this many times before, but no Kiss fan is an island. You definitely know other Kiss fans, or you're connected with other Kiss fans. So we really encourage you to take this video and share it with other people, because other people will probably, if you found this interesting, there's certainly other people that will too. So please share it with other people and leave your comments. As I said, we really, really appreciate all your feedback. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.